This is Proxy Countdown. Welcome to the big show for the week of February 26th, 2024. Alongside my tag team partner, Matt Mascardi, I'm Damian Rollis on today's countdown. A clue that Warren Buffett is finally stepping down at Berkshire. An Altria director retires and gets promoted on the same day. A Norfolk Southern director becomes a doctor and a safety expert overnight. Much ado about nothing much at the Apple vote, and on the big vote, Hologic, the Victoria's Secret of medical devices. Let's start on our trade wire. After less than 2 years of board service, Jacinto Hernandez is stepping down from the board at Altria Group in connection with his quote-unquote retirement. That's the words that the company
that they
use.
Yeah.
Hernandez will provide strategic advisory services to Altria for a period of 5 years, and Altria will pay him an annual consulting fee of $300,000. I've never seen that one before.
I would retire every day.
Atmospheric scientist Dr. Susan Avery is stepping down from the board at ExxonMobil.
Is anyone shocked by that?
It's not good news for anybody. Okay, and here's the clue about Warren Buffett. Greg Abel is stepping down from the board at the Kraft Heinz Company. Does this mean that Warren is finally ready to pass the crown to Greg at Berkshire? It could be. It could be a clue that he needs more time.
You're going to say you were right either way, so.
Tapestry has found 2 random dudes to help it sell products to women. Cisco CEO Kevin Hurricane and Bristol Myers Squibb CFO David Elkins. United Airlines has appointed Roz Brewer to its board. She was recently CEO at Walgreens after being COO at Starbucks. And in a bit of foreshadowing, let's end on Carl Icahn. Just weeks after Carl Icahn secured 2 seats on the board of American Electric Power, he promptly fired CEO Julie Sloat, whose tenure lasted less than 14 months. She will be replaced on an interim basis by Benjamin Fouke III. He's the former CEO chair of Xcel Energy. He's already on the board of American Electric, and he will receive a Golden Hello package worth roughly $8 million, and if he's still in that interim board seat on August 26th, he gets another $1 million. That's what's going on at a Carl Icahn controlled company. Again, that's foreshadowing to our report on Hologic. Okay? Keep that in mind.
I got it.
Let's move on. Let's move on to the proxy cage matches. The proxy war at Disney stays hot. A lot of Blackwells this week. Blackwells wants AI. It's relentlessly attacking Nelson Peltz, and it's posting a bunch of AI-generated photos and memes.
There's over 120 filings this year alone just from this proxy war.
Moving over to Norfolk Southern. This is a good one. Norfolk Southern versus Ankara, where Ankara wants to replace the CEO, COO, and basically the entire board. Okay, this week, Norfolk released a preliminary proxy statement where it highlighted safety improvements. One of the ways it highlighted this is by reporting that it has, quote, increased safety committee meeting cadence to enhance oversight of key safety initiatives.
Does that just
Sorry
mean
for the laughter.
More? Has that met a couple more times?
But here's what's most noteworthy. Norfolk Southern is reporting an updated, it's a self-reported skills matrix. It's updated from last year. Most notably, the skill called Environmental and Safety from 2023 has been renamed to Safety. So before, it was a thorough understanding of safety and environmental issues. And now it is a deep understanding of safety process, including the transportation of industrial space, or board or executive responsibility for oversight of safety metric compliance. Okay, so here's the incredible part. The new safety committee chair is a man named Chris Jones, Matt. He did not have a check mark next to his name for the environmental and safety skill in 2023. But now he suddenly has a check mark next to his name for safety in 2024, and it gets worse. While his bio includes no mention of the word safety in 2023, and it referred to him as Mr. Jones. Flash forward to today, in 2024, his bio now suddenly refers to him as Dr. Jones. 7 times they call him Dr. Jones, with no reference to his educational background. Nothing. We don't know why he's a doctor. And, Matt, it mentions the word safety in his bio 15 times, including 8 times in the first 3 sentences, which is basically 2.7 safeties per sentence. So this is just an incredible turnaround for I don't know what I'd call him, Dr. Jones. This is just incredible. Right?
I don't know.
We've never seen anything like this.
No, I don't know how to feel. Whether
Safety
to feel
washing.
That the skills matrix in and of itself, because on the show we've talked about skills matrices in the past, whether these are just gaslights, right? Like
or fraud. This could be fraud.
I mean, it feels like fraud to me, but like at best it's a gaslight, at worst it's fraud. But Norfolk Southern is the Gregory Anton of gaslighting. This is a master class in rearranging the chairs on train 32N that derailed in Ohio. This is really unbelievable levels of make-believe and fiction with no explanation, and they don't have to. And yet, Ancora is got a slate up because of this. I mean, it has to be largely because this is just a joke.
I thought the new check mark in the skills metrics was enough. I mean, I thought, I kind of giggled at that. But when I saw the amount of times it used the word safety and the fact that a Mr. became a doctor, I was floored.
That's next level.
Moving over to our vote results table. The vote is in at Apple. Shareholders are happy, I suppose. All directors received the support of at least 94% of the vote.
Yeah, except that there was support elsewhere, right? Director votes are basically now stay on TSR because Apple, we covered Apple on this show. We talked about the future of Apple is going to be AI and augmented reality, and not a single board member is capable of sort of designing guardrails around that. But TSR trumps everything. Yesterday's TSR basically trumps the future of the company based on these votes.
Moving over to Say on Pay at Apple, shareholders are slightly more disgruntled. 8% said no, but that's not really that notable. And finally, regarding shareholder proposals, there were 3 anti-woke proposals at Apple this year. All 3 failed miserably, to no one's surprise, all under 2%. So let's move over to the 2 shareholder proposals that actually did well. Arjuna Capital's proposal asking for a report on racial and gender pay gaps received the support of 31% of voters, and an AFL-CIO proposal asking for a report on the use of AI received the support of 36% of voters. So when we adjust the vote to eliminate the management-friendly shares of Vanguard, BlackRock, and Warren Buffett, the data actually shows that 48% of Apple voters supported Arjuna Capital's proposal, and 56%, a clear majority, voted to approve a report on the use of AI.
But this is the confusing hypocrisy. If 56% of non-BlackRock, non-Warren Buffett investors are worried about AI, none of those investors think to replace board members with board members whose skills include managing AI responsibly. That doesn't make any sense. Actually, the suggestion is that investors have no way to evaluate the skills and talent on these boards. And
how dare you?
They can evaluate shareholder proposals.
And this show.
Yeah, this show is the only way.
Hire us as consultants, use our data, listen to our shows. And lastly, at Raymond James Financial, while all directors were reelected with ease, 17% of the vote said no on Say on Pay. Again, to your point, Matt, they do find some areas to get upset about, but they never, very rarely do they target that at
I just
the
think
directors.
the proxy advisors that everyone's using, if you're using ISS and Glass Lewis, they're not evaluating directors except in special situations or by sort of rote algorithm.
Very obvious situations.
I mean, there's no other way to explain why you'd have votes against pay but not against the directors who set pay, or votes for a report on AI but not votes for directors or board refreshment with directors who have AI experience. It makes no sense.
Let's move over to the big vote. The big vote this week is Hologic, a Massachusetts-based medical devices company for medical devices for women. The vote is coming up on March 7th, 2024. A few general observations. This is very much a company controlled by its CEO and chair, Stephen McMillan. Stephen McMillan came in to the company because of Carl Icahn. Carl Icahn acquired 13% of Hologic shares in 2013, I believe. And he found, he added 2 directors and he added Stephen McMillan, which was noteworthy at the time because Stephen McMillan had just been fired at Stryker, another company in the medical field. He originally resigned for family reasons, but then it turned out that he was basically let go because he had a relationship with Jennifer Koch, who worked as a flight attendant on Stryker's corporate jet fleet. And what's interesting here, Matt, is that it was actually, we talk about influence all the time. We talk about these family connections and connections. It was reported by the Wall Street Journal, I believe. It was actually the granddaughter of the company's founder, Rhonda Stryker, who was the biggest individual shareholder at the time, who was most upset that the CEO was having an affair with an employee. Also, I will add at the time, Stephen McMillan's wife, Amy McMillan, was a director at a catering company that made $500,000 in services from Stryker at the same time. So all this was going on at Stryker, which is part of the reason why he was let go. So it's going to be no surprise that what's happening at Hologic, knowing who Carl Icahn found to run the company. The main takeaways I have here is that, first of all, we always look at the performance of these companies according to our matrix. Hologic actually performs quite well overall, hitting 731. But I will say this is the first company that I've seen, and of all the companies that we've covered, where one director underperforms in every category, and that's Amy Wendell. She is the outlier in performance in every single category that we cover. And the other takeaway before I hand it over to you, Matt, to give us your assessment of the board, is that this is just a heavily connected and intertwined board. It's just it overlaps in so many ways. Starting with CEO Stephen McMillan, he spent 11 years at Johnson & Johnson with another director, Ludwig Hansen. He's connected to 2 executives through Stryker. He's connected to another director, Charles Dockendorf, through Boston Scientific. The lead independent director has been there for 2 decades, and her stepson works at the company. And Amy Wendell, who I just mentioned, who is an underperformer, she's connected to everybody. She's connected to General Counsel John Griffin because they sit together on this board called Por Cristo. She's connected to Charles Dockendorf through Covidien and Tyco. And she's also connected to Ludwig Hansen through Baxter. She's also connected to the chair of the pay committee, Scott Garrett, through Baxter. Blah, 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 blah. I know I'm droning on, but this board is just heavily intertwined.
I think that's half the story. I'm going to back up slightly and just give some stats on the company itself. So the business model for Hologic is it's a women's health device company. They do breast cancer, mammogram devices, gynecology, skeletal body composition, or skeletal density body composition. Their biggest, most recent sort of release was an implant called BioZorb, which you actually implant into a breast and mark a place where you have to remove tissue later. They've actually increased their R&D spending over the last 3 years from 4.9% of revenue in 2021 to 7.3 in 2023. Their major competitors are all these other health device companies. It's, we covered Becton here, but Baxton, Intuitive Surgery. Their stock, one of the biggest stories, I think, if you're an investor, if you're just looking at these kind of numbers, their stock is underperformed. Year to date, they're actually over the last year to date, 1 year, 2 year, And 5-year, they're underperforming the S&P 500, sometimes by substantial amounts. In the last year, they lost 4.6%, where the S&P was up 31%. So there's a clear case here for underperformance. So you already are probably upset at this company and maybe at its board. Analysts seem to think they're a bit mixed. A third of them say it's a buy, or strong buy. A third say it's just a buy, and 26% say a hold. They all agree it's overvalued. It's an overvalued stock.
Does that much saying it's a buy suggest that the price is It's underpriced?
I mean, right now they're saying it's overvalued because it's trading at a 35 PE.
I will say this, before you move on, is that this is clearly another instance where Carl Icahn was coming in for short-term gain. He got 13% of shares. He put in a CEO and focused him purely on not only reforming the company, but to focus purely on sales in the short term. And in fact, his pay metrics reflected that. Carl Icahn, the stock price went up, and Carl Icahn completely abandoned the company. So it's no surprise that the stock has basically been flat since then, because when Carl Icahn takes over these companies, he's really in it for himself, or for, I guess, people who are in it for short-term kind of casino things, right?
Well, there's more to that story, the aftermath.
Go ahead.
But let's go back to the Icahn piece, and then we'll kind of hit more of the stats. This is actually a case study in how Carl Icahn actually destroys a company. This is, if you want to know how activists don't work, then read the history of Hologic. In 2012, as you mentioned, McMillan is forced out of the CEO role at Stryker. In the interim, before he joins Hologic, he actually joins a startup that basically makes bug spray, and that startup is shut down by the EPA. And now it's worth mentioning here that McMillan has no medical background. He is an econ major, an MBA. He has a sales
background.
He's a sales guy. He's a sales guy. He does it very, very well. Okay,
and he gets fired for illicit affairs.
So this isn't somebody who's creating stuff. This is somebody who's selling stuff, and he's not bad at that job. But Icahn takes his stake in Hologic in 2013, at the end of 2013, and instills two people from Icahn Enterprises on the board, the CEO, and basically asks for the entire executive team to be recycled. And so over the next year to 2 years, that executive team turns over. And in the first full year post Icahn, revenue is up. Like, they are increasing their sales. They actually replace all of these executives. The executive team was about 50% medical, bioengineering, electrical engineering, replaced almost entirely with sales. Almost entirely with sales.
As you would if you're incentivizing your executives to get their bonuses from sales, and if you want a short-term stock price gain, right? So you can get rid of your shares. I mean, that's what you would do, right?
Which is what exactly what happens. We see that the largest markup, the largest expense increase is in sales and marketing, which has a 9% increase over the time Icahn owns it, where everything else is relatively flat or steady. And Icahn exits in 2016, March of 2016. He says, quote, "Hologic is the quintessential example of activism at its best. We commend Steve McMillan for a job well done." He says that because it was a 100.5% return versus the S&P's 19.7% return. Icahn got his money. There is no doubt.
And he should have told other shareholders to sell too on that day.
Well, not only did Icahn get his money, but McMillan got his money. In his last 3 years at Stryker, McMillan's total accrued reported income was $19.1 million. In his Icahn years at Hologic, his reported income was $46.6 million, more than double. And this is a man who was fired from his job for having effectively an affair and pissing off not only the board, but the founder's granddaughter at the company where he was the CEO.
You know, part of the reporting by the Wall Street Journal is not just the affair that led to him being fired, but that his communication with the board was to put it nicely, I should say, was inconsistent, meaning that he was bullshitting pretty regularly with the board. So, you know, this is it's not just the affair that let him go. I mean, basically he had a bad relationship with board members. He lied. So, you know.
So here's what Icahn did. He came in,
Okay.
he turns over the board, he turns over the executive team, and he replaces what was a medical device company with people from all backgrounds.
Devices for women.
In fact, before Icahn joined, the named executive officers were a PhD, an electrical engineer, and an MBA. Okay.
Which makes sense. Yeah.
And after he leaves, he exits, it was a PhD and 5 marketing executives, 5 marketing MBA or lawyers, right? Like the whole team is basically sell at all costs. But
Which is great for short-term growth.
Exactly.
Yeah, go ahead.
The cost of that, this is still, to this day, the reason why this is pertinent, a marketing at all costs team. In fact, the current NEOs, there are more 4-year college football players, there's 3 of them, than people with marketing background and people with marketing backgrounds than PhDs. There's only one named executive officer with a PhD, and it's a woman. And she was acquired. She wasn't hired and promoted from within. She was part of an acquisition, and that's how she got her position. In fact, the most egregious of these on the executive team, and we're not even talking about the board, to me is Eric Anderson, who played 4 years at Iowa State football, that he put that in his bio while, quote unquote, getting a marketing degree, because Iowa State is a massive program. If you are a football fan,
getting a marketing degree.
There is no degree getting at these colleges, right? Like you barely have time to do anything except play football. He started at Hologic in 2014 as a regional salesman and is now division president for breast and skeletal health.
Yeah, because you know how he got to Hologic. He knew CEO Stephen McMillan from Stryker.
That's correct. He started his career right at Stryker. And this is where the whole thing falls apart. When you put your team together this way, you don't have innovation anymore. These aren't people who are designed to, like with the customer in mind. They are designed to sell and sell anything. It doesn't matter what that thing is. In fact, McMillan's latest strategy since Icahn left, he's done 2 major things, 2 major pushes. It was launch the Women's Health Index and sponsor the Women's Tennis Association, like a marketing strategy. Put my name, like Hologic name, on stuff of like designed for women. Yeah. And he did the second thing, which is to buy a company called Cynosure. The company Cynosure focuses on medical aesthetics. They basically took a company in Hologic that made medical devices to help women going through and their health needs. Basic women's health, like mammograms, skeletal bone density for osteoporosis. And he tried to pivot it to microneedling, facial dermatitis, and something called vaginal rejuvenation.
Elective cosmetic type of surgery.
In which you are doing procedures to, quote unquote, and I'm not making this up, tighten the vagina and make sexual pleasure better. Now, I'm not saying those aren't women's health needs, but doesn't that sound exactly like a man's version of what a women's health need is versus finding breast cancer early or developing new devices to track women's health issues that could be pertinent over the long term across multiple people?
When you consider that it's a company that where less than 40% of total employees are women, where there's very little female influence on the board, and where only 3 of 12 management are women, including, and I've never seen this before, one of the women listed as management at this company, and again, there aren't many, is a woman named Monica Aguirre, who is called the chief of staff, and I looked it up. Really, she's the chief executive assistant.
She's the executive assistant.
She's the assistant to the CEO, and I've never seen this before, but I mean, there's a scarcity of women at this company, an uncomfortable scarcity of women.
If you are dipping into the executive assistant pool and calling them named executive officers or leadership on your website, that means you don't have any women in leadership, and you know how that looks. So in 2017, McMillan and the board pays $1.65 billion for Cynosure to pivot into sort of women, what a male view of female aesthetics. And I'm not, again, I'm not saying that these aren't procedures that people should or could have done, but I'm saying you're pivoting the company with this purchase. $1.65 billion is not nothing. In 2018, Cynosure actually, one of their products is cited by the FDA as a risk. McMillan in that year pays himself $42 million, the most in any single year that he ever gets paid. The pay committee that year is Crawford, Garrett, and Hansen, all of whom are still on the board, and Nawana, who's stepping down this year. The whole pay committee is exactly the same for the most part. By 2019, because of the FDA citing them as a risk, because they can't synergize these two companies, McMillan and the board sell Cynosure for $205 million. He lost $1.4 billion in 2 years trying to pivot the company into something it had no business doing because there was no innovation at the company. They have no engineers, no PhDs, no doctors. They don't have women at the company, for Christ's sake. They don't have anything.
Yeah.
So this is the background of a company where 52% of the board members are connected to one another just through other boards. Forget nonprofits. It's nearly 100% when you consider nonprofits and other things. They're a middle of the their CEO is effectively a monarch. They're 100% of the influence is CEOs and connected individuals. And they have no other similarities except that they love paying their CEOs and they all know him.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, let's not forget the background here. Carl Icahn essentially takes over the company and puts in his people, starting with Stephen McMillan, and was given the mandate to remake the company in your image, basically. So it's no surprise that this is what Hologic turned into.
So that gets us to board recommendations. Let's talk about what to do.
Let's do it.
Because I think all you're looking to do here, there's two approaches. You need to de-Icahn this company, which Icahn left in 2016. It's still the exact company he left. The culture
8 years later
never changed to a company that builds medical devices. It stayed a company that does marketing and sales, led by a man whose only vision is to sell more stuff, whatever it happens to be.
To women.
This, honestly, is a 100% a target for a potential activist because it's clear that there's potential.
Maybe a stakeholder activist. Maybe we don't need any more shareholder activists.
Well, if that activist was focused on un-Icanning this culture and refocusing on the science of women's health. That's where the value is, right?
Sure.
Because
over the long term, absolutely.
This board does not actually have any history with women's health. There is not a single person who comes from women's health on this board. You're talking about econ major with nonprofit backgrounds, applied econ, literature. You have a gym teacher. Hansen was a gym teacher before he joined this board, which is, yes, he's had a career working in, the medical field, but his background, and he got his certificate in being a gym teacher. And this is an S&P 500 company. This is a massive company.
In fact, I'll say that the last two directors nominated to this board were two women, both nominated in 2023. One is a managing director at an executive search and leadership firm, and the other is the CEO of Mothers Against Drunk Driving and sits on the board of Penny Mac Mortgage. So to your point, I don't know where they're finding these people, but they have nothing to do with medical devices made for women.
So I think there's two approaches to consider with a board like this. One is a full activist, aggressive approach. In that approach, you would vote basically everyone off this board except for the two new directors, Stewart and Mahat Shami. There are two newer directors, both women, on this board, both people of color who just joined, regardless of their sort of affiliation they might have with McMillan. If you wanted to go full activist, this is a board that you'd step in and you'd say this whole board needs to be replaced because you need to replace the executive management team. You need McMillan gone. The goal here is McMillan shouldn't be there, and you shouldn't have the heads of every single division. None of them have any degree. They're not doctors. They don't know devices. They're not engineers. All of them are marketing execs who played in the college football or in the NFL. That is an absurdity on its face. The second approach is a phased approach. Because I think this board, it's hard to go out and vote against an entire board if you're an investor and you don't want to take an activist stake. But you can vote out, at a bare minimum in year one, Crawford and Stimulus, who are the two longest tenured directors. Crawford's been on this board. She's the lead independent, and I'm using air quotes here, director. How can you be independent on a board that you've sat on for 17 years?
Not to mention that the company, as I mentioned at the start, employs her stepson.
Yes, this is not an independent director on it. Like this is an easy vote against because that's not independence. And Stimulus has been there since 2013, right? So we're talking about 11 years for Stimulus. These are the two longest tenured directors. They were intimately involved in the Icahn takeover of this board. They oversaw the change in culture. They oversaw the Cynosure purchase and failure. If there's anybody you're going to hold accountable on the board for now what is a long track record of mediocrity, then you can start there. In year two, you want to vote out Wendell and Garrett, who are the next longest tenured directors and also some of the most connected. And then in year three, Dockendorf and Hansen.
What about
the remainder of the
What about McMillan? What about voting McMillan out?
Voting McMillan out seems
or
like...
do you just want the board? Do you want a new board to come in and replace him?
They need to replace him, right?
Yes, okay.
In fact,
all right.
and then there's a set of replacement skills you should have, which is focused on MDs, PhDs for at least two of the directors. You need engineering, and consider a government or military use for this because there's tremendous potential military contracts in vet hospitals that can use this, but there's no one on this board who's even close to that.
Okay, let's move on to the say on pay vote, Hologic. To your point earlier, where we often see a lot of shareholder discontentment is not, for some reason, not targeted at directors, probably because they don't have, they don't understand or want to or know how to evaluate director performance. But so sometimes you see that negative energy directed at say on pay, and that's what's happening here at Hologic. The last 3 years, there's been at least 21% of the vote against say on pay.
It has to be 100% vote against. I mean, and the vote isn't even for 2023 pay at this point, because if you're voting on a one-year basis, you don't have a view of this company and the people on it. McMillan has assembled one of the worst executive teams by skills and needs. They've made horrible acquisitions, and he's paid himself generously as part of that. In fact, the pay committee is consistently people who he knows, who he's worked with for decades, consistently.
And let me tell you what happens when this is the case, because my cursory analysis of pay at Hologic shows each and every year arbitrary raises for all NEOs. Salaries just go up every year. Targets, long-term equity grants go up. And again, it's all arbitrary, but year in and year out, they just get raises for showing up. Anything else on Hologic, or do you want to wrap up this show? I
mean, I think this is one of, honestly, the dive that we did on this company was felt, and this is not analytical, but it felt like one of the grosser companies. Like if you want an example of how activism basically focuses on the short term but trumpets itself as the long term, how you can change a culture very, very quickly at a company, and it results in their newest product, Biosorb, is being investigated by the FDA, right? Like they haven't innovated at all, and they're out there talking about themselves in the most positive way about being focused on women's health. To me, the mismatch in reality and the conversation, it's one of the most egregious I've seen at any company. So I think you vote again. My instinct is you vote against everything, whether you phase it or you do it now. Just say no to Hologic.
That's the Proxy Countdown for the week of February 26, 2024. Join us next week when we jump back into the alternative democracy pool. Forever on the lookout for shareholder sharks, floating band-aids, and wayward directors.